Everybody, it's Steph with Killer Sites. So I'm going to answer a question that I actually answered in the comments under a blog, and that was, do developers need to be good administrators of databases? Do they need to be network administrators? Short answer is no. That's why you have DBAs. DBA is short for database administrators, network administrators, network net admins. I don't know what they are all of a sudden. Anyway, so no, as a developer, you don't need to be a DBA, but you do need to have good basic knowledge of databases. So that means that you should understand how to create databases, how to properly create tables, how to do table normalization, and the basic CRUD operations. CRUD is C-R-U-D. That's create, read, update, and delete. These are the basic things that you do with databases. Now, before I go on, I just want to point out there are different types of databases. What I've been talking about now, I've been talking about the most popular type of database in the world, and that is the SQL database, or the more proper name is the relational database. And I'm not going to get into the theory of databases in this particular video, but SQL is short for structured query language, and it is a coding language used to talk to relational databases. And relational databases are the most popular type of database in the world. Just like there are different types of cars, there's sports cars, and there are sedans, and coupes, and pickup trucks. I guess a truck is not a car, but you get the idea. There are different types of databases. So relational databases, example, MySQL, Postgre, Oracle, SQL, Microsoft SQL Server. These are all examples of databases, and they are by far and away the most popular type of database in the world today. Anyhow, so do you need to be an expert in these databases? No, you don't. You just need to know your way around the basic operations and so on. There are other types of database. So you have the relational databases. There's something called an object-based database, which gets into object-oriented programming. And then you have, of course, the simple flat file database. Now, flat file database is just a text file where you put like a record. You might put, like, let's say it was a shopping cart site and you wanted to record orders, so you would have the one line of code with a list of the products, and then each record would be separated by a carriage return. Now, this could be useful for very small and simple databases, but I wouldn't recommend using them since you have all these databases that are ready for you to use, these database apps that are simple and easy to use. So why do most people use relational databases? Because they've just been around for like 30, 40 years now or longer, and they're very refined and they work very well. There are object-based databases out there which are used as well. Each type of database has its pros and its cons, and I'm not going to get into that here, all the differences, but I just want you to be aware that there are different types of databases. As a developer, you don't have to be an expert, you just need to know your basics. What are the basics? They're basic queries, like I mentioned before, the CRUD operations, maybe some slightly advanced queries that you could do, like inner joins, outer joins, but do that on the side. It's not really necessary that you be an expert in these things because they don't come up too often. Especially with the new ORM tools, ORM, Object Relational Mapping tools that you see that a lot of frameworks like Laravel or like Rails will use. So you don't really need to be an expert at low-level SQL queries. When I say low-level, meaning talking directly to the database. But you should still know how to design tables effectively so that the data is held effectively, and that's called normalization of tables. It's a whole different subject. I know I'm covering a lot, but it's a YouTube blog. What do you want? Yeah, so you should know how to design pretty decent database structures so that your code, your app code, whether you be writing in PHP or Ruby or Java or Python, so that your app code is effective, is also efficient in terms of querying the database. Because for most of us out there, 99% of our apps are going to be taking in information from users and then massaging that information, and then sending it to the database, and then pulling that information back out again and processing it and doing whatever you want with it, sending emails or computing data. That's what most of the work is. Data in, massage, data out, massage. That's really what it is. So you got to know your way around databases. Another thing I want to bring up here is that when you are building your coding skills and building experience as a coder, I can tell you from my experience since 1994, where I wrote my first bit of code, that over the time you're going to forget a lot of details. Like I used to know, for instance, a lot of details about database normalization in theory, down to the particular database, because, for instance, MySQL would be more efficient in certain areas than, let's say, SQL Server in other areas, vice versa. So when you were working with a particular database server, whether it be MySQL, PostgreSQL, whatnot, you had to get to know that particular database app so that you could optimize your structure of your databases accordingly. I forget most of this stuff now. Now, if I got back into it, spent a couple hours, it'll all start coming back to me, I am sure, and there'll be some changes. So this brings me to my final and larger point about all this stuff. The most important thing you have to learn as a developer, and it's something I stressed in other vlogs, is that the basics are super important. The basics are what carries you forward throughout your career. The basics are universal. So let me give you some examples. For instance, when you're writing code, understanding good object hierarchy and structure is very important. So we know if you're a coder, whether it be Python, Java, or PHP, designed by inheritance is not a good thing to do. Your code is brittle. You're much better off designing your object layer, your code layer rather, by interfaces, using interfaces, for instance. And that's just one example. You should know the basic design patterns, MVC. You should understand iteration. You should understand things like, well, my favorite design pattern by far is filtering and facade. And there's several other basics. You should understand the basic methodologies of refactoring. Get a good book on code refactoring. These are the skills, these basic skills that are going to carry you forward regardless of the language or the environment you find yourself in a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now. These are universal principles. These are universal techniques, for lack of better terms. You know, I got this idea, this principle from martial arts. I did martial arts for 2-3 decades, and it always comes down to the basics that separates the good fighters from the crappy fighters. You know, in martial arts, it's timing, tactics, in the order of importance: timing, tactics, mental and physical conditioning, body mechanics. These are, and speed and power. These are the things that separate the good fighters from the bad. Now, you notice in that list I mentioned with martial arts, I didn't mention techniques, you know, little techniques and this type of stuff that you see. This stuff is the least important aspect of fighting. And in software development, it's the same thing. You know, understanding the latest trick in a particular language or learning the next popular framework is not what separates the great coders. It's understanding these basic things, the basic design patterns, basic good, clean coding practices. That's what matters. Anyway, to close, you don't need to be a DBA, you don't need to be a database administrator to be a coder. You just need to know your basics. You don't need to be a network administrator. You just have to understand the basics of networks, understand the basics of the HTTP communication process, I forget the word, hypertext transfer protocol, the communication protocol of the web, if you're doing web apps. You just need to know these basics. And then from there, you can, if you need a particular piece of knowledge in a particular area, you know, in the case of databases, you can look it up, or worst case scenario, you can hire in a DBA, an expert, and they can solve that one little problem for you. I hope you find that useful, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao.